So my talk today actually grew out of a single question that I asked myself recently, which was, what advice would I give myself if I was starting out as an Android developer today? What do I think that I could tell myself if I could jump in my imaginary time machine and for some reason chose to give myself career advice with that amazing ability? What do I think I could tell myself that would have the most impact on my career, both in the short term and setting myself up for long-term just happiness and growth? And really those questions stemmed out of working with people over a number of evenings at a local meetup where people were in this space. They were learning Android development, they were trying to make career changes, jump into an Android career, and I was just struck by the challenges that they were facing. Not that they were facing challenges, because that's always going to happen, but that so many of the challenges weren't necessarily strictly related to Android. They were outside technical things, like learning tools, learning to use the terminal for the first time, but also so many challenges regarding mindset or the perceived beliefs that they have to do so many things to break into the field. So I really wanted to explore those ideas, explore what my mindset was at that time. And the reason I think this is really important is because, as we've already seen today, and we're going to talk more throughout the next couple of days, community is a big part of the Android community, obviously. But it's a big part of being a developer in the Android community. And if we want to continue to grow that community and make it as welcoming and inclusive as possible, then we can't just focus on the strictly technical aspects, because that's not the whole picture, and that's not a complete idea of what prevents people from maybe making that switch. And so right off the bat, I'm going to say there's not going to be a lot of technical content here. Things like how to handle a click, fragments versus custom views, enums yes or no, a whole slew of relevant questions that people ask, especially when they're first starting out. And those are really important questions. They're crucial to learning and to be able to build software and develop the technical skills. But I'm leaving them out because, in all honesty, I don't think they're always as important as they seem. Particularly if you're going to go back and kind of give yourself meaningful advice. All those technical things, they're going to change in a year or 2 or 5 years. We might not be doing any of this anymore. But there are other things that I would try and tell myself and tell others that are in that space today that I think would have a greater long-term impact on them. So we're going to hop in our imaginary time machine and we'll look at a few periods here in what might be an early Android developer's career. We're going to look at finding the first job, growing into that first role, and kind of building your career and thinking about what's next. And we're going to notice that there's some different unique challenges in each of these areas, but there are some themes in how we can approach them, how we can change and develop our mindset to set us up for long-term success. And we'll see patterns across all of those and kind of wrap them up nicely at the end. So finding your first job. And a common kind of question or mindset I see at this point is, do you have what it takes? As we're starting to find jobs, we immediately start comparing ourselves to kind of these arbitrary requirements. We look at all these job postings and say, you need this, this, and this. You need 3 years of experience for an entry-level position. You need to know these 6 different libraries for an entry-level position. So we immediately start comparing ourselves, which then leads to doubt in our skills and added pressure. And so even before we started, we're already causing people to start thinking that they are not enough as a developer, and suddenly they don't even think they can do it anymore. And I think some people actually have been deterred or don't even want to completely pursue something, even if they have found it interesting, because they just don't think that they can get through that door. And so I think there's a couple things that we can do to try and help this. I think one is to really define your goals. If you're in this space, think about what's actually important to you. Think about what you want sort of your life to look like, your hobbies, your interests, your career, how you want all of those to play together. And I think the reason this is important is because don't just chase a resume checkbox. I think a lot of people, when they're in this space and they're looking at what they want their first job to be like, at least in the US, and I think it's different elsewhere, but there's always this kind of ideal company that we think that you need to work out, especially starting off. And that if you don't get to that job, then you're a failure, that you don't have the skills to have what it takes to be an Android developer. And so you immediately start to feel bad about yourself. And so what I really tell people is that that's not the case. There are so many jobs out there, companies that you can work for that can allow you to build a life that you want and can set you up for long-term learning, development, and let you build things, work on things that make you happy, and hopefully will set you up nicely down the road. And so as you're looking for these jobs, the next thing I would say is don't disqualify yourself. Again, we talked about the requirements nowadays and how often it seems like you have to be a mid-level developer for an entry-level role and a senior for a mid-level. And I would say don't disqualify yourself right off the bat just because you read something you don't match the requirements exactly. Those requirements are often flexible, and experience also comes in many forms. So perhaps you don't have the extra 6 months of experience that they're asking for, but maybe you have some interesting projects. Or maybe you are a terrific chef and could demonstrate how you can take a recipe and break down the steps of that algorithm and produce a great product. There's lots of ways to demonstrate that you could be a vital asset to a team. So don't be afraid to highlight who you are, the experiences that you do have. And I think honestly in some ways this takes courage to do that, to actually be very real and say, this is what I am. Maybe I don't have exactly what you're looking for, but I think that I would be an asset to your team because of X, Y, and Z. And I think encouraging people to be in that mindset will really help them as they are building out their career. And then lastly, in this space of finding a job, say, honestly evaluate the companies and the roles that you are looking at. Again, don't just try and apply for a job because you think it's going to look good on the resume, or because it's going to be lots of money even though you know the work environment is terrible and people tend to burn out after a year. Try and know why you're interviewing there, what that they are going to bring to you, how that's going to be in line with your personal goals, your career goals, and how you can use that to build a balanced, enjoyable life for yourself. And again, think about why you want to work at that company. If you're interviewing and they ask you, why do you want to work here? And your only answer is, it's a job or it's a paycheck, that might be a red flag that you need to reevaluate. And some people laugh, but I'm always surprised when I ask that question, and that's the response I get a lot of times. And so I would encourage people to think really critically and fairly evaluate why you're trying to work at a particular place. So let's say you do. You find the job, they think it works out great for you, starting your first job. I think then we enter this new space of, do I know enough? Do you know enough things to be successful in this role? And so you start to have a lot of questions. Where is your desk? Where do I go on the first day? What's expected of me in this role? Where's the code? How is it structured? How do we build? What patterns are you using? Where's the coffee machine? All of these things are very valid, relevant questions, and just, barely the tip of the iceberg. You're gonna have so many questions when you're in this first experience, whether it's your first day, week, month, 6 months, year, this doesn't really change. And so I would ask you, how do you feel about those questions? When you have that question in your mind, do you feel embarrassed about it? Do you feel some shame around the fact that you don't already know this answer, and so now you don't think that you're good enough to be in this position, and that maybe you've been duping them all along? Are you comfortable saying, I don't know? And so to some people this might seem kind of silly or trivial to ask, but I talk with a lot of people that are in this place. They are afraid to ask how to set up a click listener because they think it's a stupid question, or they don't want to seem silly when they want to compare libraries or something. And all this mindset is really holding those people back. And I know from experience, because I was absolutely in this place. I had an amazing team around me in my first job, and I still didn't always ask those questions to my own detriment. And it definitely held back how much I could have grown in those early days. And so I always tell people in this place, these questions are perfectly normal. This is exactly where you should be. Sort of embrace that experience of not knowing everything and being in a position in your career where it's 100% expected that you're going to spend a lot of your time, almost most of your time, learning, developing, and growing as a developer. And remember that you don't know everything, and nobody else knows everything either. So you're no different than anybody else. Even the senior developer on your team is not going to know everything. They might just know different things. And again, be open and honest about what you do know. It's okay to not know everything, but recognize what you do know. Don't try to fake it because you're worried about not seeming knowledgeable on a particular area. ask yourself, do you really want to learn? Do you want to have a growth mindset and long-term over your career continue to learn and grow and develop? Or do you want to never be wrong? You can't necessarily have you can't have both of them. And so you have to learn to sort of be comfortable in that space. And why ask these questions? Why not just try and figure it out on your own? Well, because you can learn faster that way. You ask a question, you usually get a response. That response usually contains some piece of knowledge, and that's then how you learn. So if your goal is to learn, then asking these questions sooner rather than later will help you learn faster. That can then lead to things like greater productivity. You might discover tools, patterns, shortcuts, libraries, many, many things that you might eventually find on your own, but why wait? Why wait to figure those out maybe randomly when you could ask a team member? I didn't know about IntelliJ when I first started. I was still rocking Eclipse, and my life changed greatly when I discovered how much nicer that was. Same thing with Genymotion. I used to avoid emulators like the plague until I discovered the joys of functional emulators. And so these are just a couple examples of how your daily experience can be much improved, your life can be greatly improved, and you can continue to become more productive and grow as a developer. And again, having this open communication, being honest about what you know and don't know, it develops trust and confidence in your team. For example, if you are in a planning session and you don't want to look like you don't know something and say, yeah, sure, I can build this, and you have no idea how to build it, you don't know what those requirements are, there's a good chance that if you don't go back and clarify all that stuff, you're going to be in the awkward position of having to say, oh, I'm sorry, I can't ship this week, I need 2 more sprints. Feels a whole lot better, and it's a whole lot better for your growth as a developer to admit what you don't know and say, hey, can we pair on this? Can we break down this task into a couple things? And then you can deliver on those consistently. Your team will then start to trust you. You'll develop confidence in your ability to break down those tasks, and they'll develop confidence in your ability to do it. And so you might, while you're in this place, be thinking, shouldn't you know these things? Some of the examples here might seem trivial, but there's other questions out there as well that maybe don't seem so trivial. And so I think in general, in this phase of the career, think about this. They already have hired you, which means they already think that you have the skills required to do the job, and they already think that you're worth investing in. So if you're worried about not giving them a return on their investment, it stands to reason that open and honest curiosity, learning, questions, that's actually the best way for you to give them that return on the investment. It's going to be the best way for you to grow, and everybody is going to be happier and a much better mindset around that. All right, so now we're building our career. We're starting to get comfortable in our job. We might start to think, am I doing enough? Am I going to be able to get the places where I want to be? So one of the real challenges is how do we stay up to date? Android is always changing. There's so many new things constantly coming out. And I think it's really key to embrace that change. Recognize that what you know today might not be relevant in a year. How you build apps today might not be the new trendy way to build apps in a year from now. And you have to be okay with that and comfortable with it. Recognize that you're not going to do it all. You can't do it all. Your app can't always be using the latest and greatest frameworks. So what should you focus on? I like to think about asking a few questions. What is relevant to you at work? What could you explore easily within your day-to-day work life? What are you personally interested in? What keeps you excited? What makes you want to explore and to learn and have that little curious bug in your head that keeps prompting you to ask more and more questions? And then how can you work those together so that you can explore these things, develop and grow without sacrificing your personal life? There's more to life than just being at the computer all day. And so you don't want to have to dive into all these things at the sacrifice of your hobbies, your interests. So try and find ways to merge those together if you can, and recognize that it's completely okay if you don't want to. You don't have to be exploring these things all the time. Maintain perspective as you're going through this journey. Don't let the trivial things wear you down. Things like one API versus another API. Which library is best for image loading? Fragments versus custom views versus activities. All of these things are important. But again, these largely are going to depend on your project. They're going to depend on the other people in the conversation. And if you start to hang your hat on them too much, it does start to wear you down. And so recognize that those aren't the end-all be-all. Remember that no one else is doing all of the things. It's really easy. You come to the conference, you hear about all these cool patterns and libraries, you see a million blog posts coming out all the time, and all that stuff's great. But it's also very easy to start to think that, oh, this imaginary person that is the community is doing everything. Every project now is using all the architecture components and RxJava and Kotlin and coroutines and all this stuff. And suddenly you realize, oh, we're not using this, we must be behind. That's not the case. As you talk to people, you recognize that, that's not true at all. And then again, if you are in that place of thinking that you're not doing enough, you're not using the latest and greatest, it's easy to think that you're behind, and so you start to sacrifice your personal life. You start to chew into that other time. And I would really encourage you not to do that. Recognize that work is work. It's okay to leave that at work. You don't need to bring it home. And if there's other things you want to explore, try and find things that make you excited and refresh you so that when you do have to dive back into the daily work, that it doesn't feel like a grind. It doesn't feel like you are slowly losing your interest in what attracted you to development in the first place. And lastly, on this point, be aware of how you impact those around you. If you want to be working on a side project, I don't necessarily discourage that, but be aware of what that looks like to people. If you're a mid to senior level person on your team and you are spending all of your weekend time coding, that is inevitably going to lead to the junior people on your team that are looking up to you, that's now the expectation. And maybe that's not even your intent, but that does happen. So be aware of how what you work on affects those around you, whether it's on your immediate team, people in the community. We don't necessarily develop this stuff in isolation. As we're more and more social, we have to think about those around us. And lastly, when we're thinking about our career, I encourage you to dream big. Understand your motivations, understand what you want your career to look like, and take meaningful steps towards that vision. If you really take a look at yourself and the motivations, you start to understand your doubts, your fears, your goals, insecurities, and as you start to recognize those things, you can start to see where they might be holding you back, and it can give you the courage to really aim big and look at building the exact kind of life and career that you want to. And again, recognize there's no single blueprint. You can't look at one person and be like, I'm going to mimic exactly what they did, because all of our experience is different. And so that means that you have the freedom to do whatever feels unique and appropriate for yourself. And so we've talked about a lot of things here, and we could easily talk about many, many more. We don't have the time. So let's say this, this is hard. Here is a small subset of some of the challenges and topics that sort of the community threw out over this last week. And again, this is not even probably 2/3 of them. There's a lot of stuff here. And as I read through this list, I also recognize that this doesn't change. I've been doing Android now for I think 6 or 7 years, and I still struggle with a lot of this stuff. So it's not like even once you sort of get past that first year or two in your career that this suddenly goes away and everything is okay. Which leads me to this, imposter syndrome, which a lot of people here probably are familiar with at this point. But I include it because the me from even just a couple years ago would have had no idea what it was. So seeing a definition like this, hearing that other people experience this and that it's actually a thing to the point where people build a whole career in talking about it, actually really helps you to recognize that, hey, I'm not alone. Everybody else feels like this at some time or another as well. And so I would encourage you to seek to understand where that feeling of maybe insecurity or being not enough comes from. It'll help you recognize it and be able to mitigate it more fully, and so that it doesn't hold you back. And recognize again, you're not alone. And I really think that this is the secret sauce. Again, we've talked a little bit about the community. I think that community can really help us combat this and sort of build what we want in our career. There's so many people out there that want to help us, and it can be incredibly rewarding. However, it doesn't just happen. You actually have to take steps to do that, and that can be hard in itself. Again, that takes a little bit of courage to step outside of what's comfortable to you and put yourself out there. And you also have to have some self-compassion to recognize that if you put yourself out there and it doesn't go the way you think, that doesn't mean that you are bad, that you're a bad developer. It just is, a little hiccup on your path. And I point this out again because I'm a great example of this. It used to take me 10 minutes to compose a single tweet, and then I would usually delete it because I was too worried about what the response would be or people would disagree with me. And I can say it's much more rewarding to send it out and you'll see that you can be rewarded with that interaction. So what would I tell myself? I would tell myself, be curious, ask the questions, step outside of the comfort zone, take risks. You are enough as a person in general, as a developer. It's okay to take a break. Your work is not you. Your side projects are not you. You can build the career and life that you want just as you are, however you want it. And I would encourage you to seek out and build connections with those around you and develop a support system. And so as I read these again, I'm coming back to these same themes of the courage to sort of step out and be seen and to take risks, ask questions, self-compassion to accept yourself where you're at, and the connection, bringing people around you and recognizing that together you are stronger and more capable than alone. It's hard to have an impact when you're burnout, alone, and afraid. And I think as developers, often having an impact is what ultimately we really want to do with the products we build and what we spend our time on. And so as I wrap up, I want to say just a big thanks to sharing for everybody that contributed ideas. There's so many responses, very thoughtful, honest, and open. So this is just several slides worth of people that contributed. I really appreciate this, and honestly I would love to hear from more people and continue these conversations because I think they're really important. I also want to thank Udacity for sending me out here. Very relevant in this, that produce learning content for Android, so if you're in that space, check it out. And if you are interested in helping people learn, we are hiring Android content developers, so you can check out this link to look for those job openings. And thank you for coming. You can find me pretty much everywhere on the interwebs at N8Ebel. All right.